Shabbat Shalom Mishpocha! Welcome to another edition of Torah Tidbits. Today's Torah portion is Beshalach, which means when he sent, and it comes from Shemot, Exodus 13, all the way to chapter 17, verse 16. I'm just going to read a couple verses from Exodus chapter 16, and I'm going to be reading verses 4 and 5. And it says, "Then said Yahweh unto Moshe, Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain rate every day, that I may prove them whether they will walk in my Torah, my law, or no. And it shall come to pass that on the 6th day they shall prepare that which they bring in, and it shall be twice as much as they gather daily." So obviously this Torah portion is discussing the manna raining down from heaven and the gathering of the manna. And if you'll remember that Hashem prohibited the gathering of manna on Shabbat. Friday, you were supposed to gather in double what you normally gather, and that would last you through Shabbat. Now, normally, a day's worth of manna, if left overnight, it would rot. It would breed worms. But a miracle happened every Shabbat because the manna that they brought in on Friday would keep all the way until Sunday, until they were able to gather in the manna again afresh. So it kept all through Shabbat, and it didn't breed worms. So that was the miracle. And God made that provision so as they would keep the commandment and not gather on the Sabbath. Now they have seen a pattern: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. If they keep the manna overnight, it breeds worms. So I'm sure the first couple times when they gathered in the manna on Friday, a lot of them, the Torah even says that a lot of them went out to go and gather the manna on Shabbat, but they didn't find any. So it was a true test for them whether they were going to believe Yahweh or not, that He was going to keep that manna fresh all through Shabbat. And if you also remember, there was one man who was gathering sticks on Shabbat, and he was executed for this. He was stoned, I believe. And so, Hashem wanted the Shabbat to be observed, to rest and to study Torah and to commune with Him and your family on Shabbat. And He clearly says here in the passage that we just read that He's going to do this as a test. Now, I don't know about you, but it seems like the pattern in my life, it's either feast or famine. And rarely is it feast, but sometimes Hashem does bless me, and I have an overabundance. But most of the time, I live from hand to mouth, from paycheck to paycheck. And it seems like every time I try to get caught up, and I actually feel like I'm making headway and getting caught up, something will happen, and I'll have to spend money that I wasn't anticipating, and boom, here I am, living from one week to the next, again and again. And I wonder why Hashem does that, why Yahweh allows this to happen, and maybe you have wondered the same thing, but I think I figured it out. Hashem allows these things to happen to test our faith, to see if, just as the Torah said, that I may prove them, whether they will walk in my law or no. Am I going to get antsy and say, oh no, am I going to have enough money for next month? Maybe I should pull in an extra shift at work on Shabbat. Chas v'shalom. I trust Yahweh enough to say, you know what, I don't care if I have $0 in my bank account. I'm going to trust Yahweh, and I'm not going to work on Shabbat. He will provide. He will come through, and I will seek out work Monday through Friday and then Sunday. Or maybe I should have said Sunday through Friday. I'm going to search out for work then. But Shabbat and the high holy days, they're untouchable. I will not touch those. So Hashem does these things to see if we will obey Him or not. And it keeps us humble. It keeps us humble, and it keeps us reliant on the Creator, because the temptation is, and maybe those who grew up during the Depression, maybe they hoarded. Maybe they grew up and became hoarders because they were afraid that if they didn't save it and scrimp and save and hoard it, that they wouldn't have it tomorrow. Because each day, through people who lived through the Depression, they didn't know where their next meal was coming from. Literally, they didn't know one day from the next if they were going to have a potato or a piece of bread on their table, or if they were going to have to go hungry one evening. And so, during the years of plenty, during the time of plenty, a lot of these people got in the habit of hoarding and saving stuff until it totally spoiled. And I've heard story after story of this through people who lived through the Depression. So are we going to trust God? Are we going to hoard and try to provide for ourselves, only to realize that everything that we try to scrimp and save just ends up rot and worms? Because have you noticed, whenever you try to save and hoard things, even Ecclesiastes talks about that there are people who gather and gather and gather and gather, and they're left with nothing. The Proverbs and Ecclesiastes says this. And then it also says that there are those who give liberally from a generous heart, and yet they have plenty. It's spiritual law. The spiritual law sometimes seems a paradox, or seems to go against natural law. But when you're dealing with spiritual law, sometimes it doesn't always line up with physical law. When you give, and give out of a giving heart for love of Yahweh and for love of others, God's going to make sure that you're provided for. But if you hoard, that just means you're being selfish, and that means you're just worrying about nobody but yourself. And you're going to find that what you gather breeds worms. You're going to find what you gather rots. So we really need to focus on our love and our trust through Yahweh. And sometimes Yahweh allows us to go through famine, to go through hardships and times where we don't know where our next meal is coming from, because He truly wants to know if we're going to keep His Torah or not. He truly wants to know if we're going to trust Him to survive. Growing up, I'll admit I really didn't have it rough. We weren't rich, but we weren't poor either. We were lower middle class, but I do remember times when my dad had some economic hardships. And there were literally times where we didn't know where our next meal was coming from. And I remember specifically one day where we didn't know what we were going to eat the next week. And lo and behold, out of the blue, we come home one evening and there's groceries sitting on our doorstep. Miracle of miracles, Baruch Hashem. You know, the Lord spoke to somebody, and somebody knew about our need and they provided. Did we tell them? No, we didn't tell people about our economic hardships. My dad was a prideful man, you know. He wanted to be able to make it on his own. So we know that God told somebody, God laid it on somebody's heart to give us groceries that week, and it provided for us. And I can't tell you how many times in my life where, I didn't know how God was going to provide for certain bills or for certain expenses that we had. But you know what? After I calmed myself down and decided not to worry about it and truly put my trust in God, boom, unexpected checks come in. Boom, somebody gave a donation. Boom, something happened miraculously that solved the problem. God comes through every time. So on Shabbat, don't go out there looking for the manna. The manna is already in your house. You gathered it on Friday. So take the manna that you gathered on Friday, because it will sustain you. It will not breed worms. It will not rot. It will sustain you all through Shabbat, because we're supposed to rest in Him. We're supposed to study His Torah and learn and read the love letter of God to us, and apply it to our hearts and our lives, to fellowship with family and friends, and to worship in synagogue with our brothers and sisters. That's what Shabbat is all about. It's a time of rest to recharge our batteries. And a lot of times, God will test us. Something may happen at the last minute on Friday, right before Shabbat happens, and God's saying, are you going to trust me, or are you going to try to meet this need? Shabbat's here. You can't meet the need. Are you going to meet it and break my Torah? Or are you going to trust me and trust that at the end of Shabbat, that your need will already be provided for, or I will show you a way that it will be provided for? So let's remember to trust Hashem, to love Him and to trust Him with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to trust that Hashem is going to provide manna for us on a daily basis, and the manna we gather on Friday is going to last us through Shabbat. Shabbat Shalom and Shavua Tov.